We are not powerless to disinformation. I like to say that we are all on the front lines of the information war. So I worked as a strategic communications advisor to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry in 2016 and 2017. As Donald Trump was getting elected, as the United States and the EU was learning about the revelations of Russian election interference. And what I learned when I was in Ukraine and interviewing members of governments across Central and Eastern Europe is that they recognized the threat of foreign disinformation before the West did. They did not approach it with hubris, thinking that their institutions would save them. They started to invest early on in things like information literacy and things like government coordination cells that would help them respond nimbly and efficiently to ongoing informational threats. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they are removing information from the internet. Quite the opposite. They are empowering their citizens to navigate an increasingly complex information environment. And I think that's something that we in the West have been really slow on the start to pick up. One of the most important things that I tell everyone, from my, Aunt Sally and Uncle Larry to my students at Syracuse University, is that the most engaging content online is often the most enraging content. So if you feel yourself getting emotional, the most important thing you can do is take some space between yourself and your device, whether that's your computer or your phone, put it down, think about what made you react that way. And if you're still interested in that story or that allegation in a couple minutes after, as Gen Z says, you go touch grass or take a little walk, the most important thing that you can then do is stop and think about where you might find other coverage of that incident. If nobody else is covering it, there's a good chance that either it's a breaking news story and there will be more coverage soon, or perhaps it's not actually true and this person or outlet is trying to pull a fast one on you, right? If there is other coverage, you can compare the coverage, you can compare the tone, you can compare the facts, the quotations. Perhaps a wire service is running it. If a wire service is running it, it's got, some good support there from a credible news outlet. But if it's coming from a troll on X with an egg as its profile picture, it might not be true, and perhaps you shouldn't put the full credence of your belief behind it. You can also do things like reverse image searches. If there's like a particularly salacious image attached with something, with Russian disinformation about the war in Ukraine, we often see images that actually come from the Balkan conflicts in the early 1990s attributed to Ukraine today. And by doing a reverse image search on those images, you can identify if they've been misattributed. We also here in Washington, often when we've got large storms, people share pictures of sharks swimming in the Potomac River. Those are actually artificially generated or bad Photoshop jobs. They're not real. But that's a great way that you can kind of check. So again, stop, take a moment, think about why you're reacting the way that you are. You can still do some research, but always remember that if it feels emotional, you might be being manipulated. My book, How to Be a Woman Online, came out of both my own experience dealing with online harassment, as well as interviews and research that I had done with women around the world. I have heard from journalists, executives, activists, academics that they experience far and away worse abuse than their male counterparts do. And so I started to try to quantify that. And what I found there was that this is a universal experience for women in public life and leadership. And we need to treat it now, because the online is the offline. There is no, wall that separates us. We need to treat it as an inevitability so that we are prepared when it happens. And that's a lot of responsibility. And what I sought to do with my book, How to Be a Woman Online, was to equip women with the tools they needed to navigate these really difficult situations and be prepared to do so. I myself have gone through quite a bit of online networked harassment. I've dealt with everything from image-based deepfake sexual abuse to doxing and stalking. And if I had not taken the precautions that I give advice for in my book, things like IT security tips, operational security tips, my experience may have been a lot worse. But it's not just about making sure you have a good password manager or are using two-factor authentication. It's also about creating the support networks that you need so that when the worst happens, you have people who understand what you're going through that you're able to lean on. And that's not just your friends and family. That's also, the management at the company that you're working for or your academic institution. We need to create a culture that's more supportive of people who are putting themselves out there and putting their whole selves out there in a way that sometimes reflects on their family, that puts their family at risk. So that's what I hope to do. It's a quick, short read. It's fun for such a deep topic. And it gives some really practical tips about how to hold your digital ground. And I think that's something really important for women in today's online environment. I hope that audiences take away from my speeches the idea that we are not powerless to disinformation. I like to say that we are all on the front lines of the information war. And I don't mean that to scare anybody. You're not doing hand-to-hand combat with Russia, but we can stop dis and misinformation in its tracks if we just think about the content that we're encountering, how it's making us feel, why it got into our feeds in the first place, both from the perspective of the person who put that information there and the social media platforms who decided to serve it to us, right? If we think about the provenance of that information, then we can decide whether or not to share it, whether to report it, whether to perhaps post a comment that might give other people who are looking at that information some context or nuance about the information that's being shared. We all have a role to play. And I actually find that incredibly empowering. It's one of the reasons I teach my graduate students all about media literacy in the course that we do. I want everyone to be much more deliberate in the information that they consume. Right now, we get fed notifications and we're doom scrolling and it's all quite passive, right? But if we can add a little bit more deliberation to our online engagement, I think, again, we can stop disinformation in its tracks and we can be part of the solution to winning the information war.